Good morning. Thanks for joining us live today. I'm Julie Holton, and I'm joined by Foster Swift attorney Mike Zahrt. Mike, thanks for joining me this morning.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so Mike, we talked just a few weeks ago about the Paycheck Protection Program. We were just saying it feels like it was just yesterday that you were talking about what it would take for businesses to apply for this loan program. Now here we are talking about the next steps in this program. So for those who are kind of tuning in, let's first talk through what the Paycheck Protection Program is and then why these next steps are so important.
Sure, yes. So when we last talked, the program just became available, and we suggested that pretty much every small business should apply for this, right? Because at the time it was billed as free money. Who doesn't love free money? That's still the case. So it's a loan available through the SBA that you can use primarily for payroll costs. You can use it for other things like rent, utilities, mortgage interest payments, but it's primarily designed to give you an 8-week bridge loan to use to bring people back off of layoff and get them back receiving their paycheck. So that's the primary advantage of the program. And then the incentive of taking out this loan is that if you spend it the way you're supposed to spend it, it'll be forgiven. The SBA will pay off your loan in full, and it is essentially free money. Obviously, the big catch then being making sure that you jump through all of those forgiveness hoops to make sure that it's truly forgiven.
Okay, so let's talk through that a little bit. So the SBA just put out the application. So if a business was granted, applied for and was granted this PPP loan, that's not where their process ends. They still need to go through this next step in the process. So what is this next step, Mike?
Right. So the next step now is, everyone's usually in their covered period by now, and some of you might be a long way through, right? We've got a couple people who are into their 5th or 6th week of the 8-week, quote unquote covered period that you have to spend the money in. So I guess one thing to address up front is that if you want full forgiveness of your PPP loan, you've got to spend the whole thing in that 8-week covered period. And the Secretary of Treasury is very clear that they're not going to extend any relief on that. There's been some chatter about maybe we can get this stretched out. There's still congressmen talking about that. But as things stand right now, if you want the whole thing forgiven, you've got to spend it in the whole 8 weeks. And if you're one of the people that were early to apply for this, you're probably over halfway through the program. So you're really in the process now of forecasting out, how many employees do we have? What are we paying them? Am I satisfying these 3 tests? We should probably talk about what those 3 tests are. So just the 10,000 foot view here is we've got 3 of them. We have an employee census, we have a wage reduction test, and what I'm calling the 75% test. The first test looks at the number of full-time equivalent employees you had previously. You get to pick your period. There's 2 measuring periods, but you essentially go back either to 2019 or the beginning of 2020, and you look at how many full-time equivalent employees do I have. So if I've got somebody working over 40 hours a week, that's 1. If I've got somebody working 20 hours a week, they count for half. You do this calculation for every employee, and then you forecast your covered period. How many people do I have now? Have I laid off people? Have I furloughed people? And the whole purpose of this first test is to incentivize you to bring those folks back off of layoff, get them back on payroll. And the idea is that if you don't, they're going to reduce your eligible forgiveness amount by essentially the percentage of people you didn't bring back. So if I've got 100 employees and I leave 25 of them on layoff, that's 75% of my previous FTE level. I'm only going to be eligible for 75% loan forgiveness on my PPP loan. That remaining 25% is going to be a true loan. It's not going to be forgiven. So that's the purpose of the first test: get people back off of layoff, back off of furlough, get them back on payroll. They have a second test that is kind of a hedge against employers bringing people back, but really dialing back their wages, right? So they say, okay, well, we'll bring you back to work, but I was paying you $20 an hour. Now I'm only going to pay you $15 an hour. Well, they don't want that either. They want people, it's the Paycheck Protection Program, right? If they're not protecting your paycheck if you're only making, less than you were. So that's this wage reduction test. This is kind of the similar concept of the first test. We look back at what people were making during the first quarter of the year. We look at their hourly rate. We look at their hourly rate they're receiving now. And if it's below a certain threshold, it reduces your forgiveness dollar for dollar. So if I bring you back, but I cut your pay in half, there's this formula you apply. and it's going to reduce my eligible forgiveness amount by essentially the exact same dollar amount that I should have paid them to make them equal to what they were getting paid before. So it's essentially just preserving the status quo. And if you reduce it too much, we're going to penalize you and treat it as a loan instead of forgiveness. So that's the second test. And then the third test wasn't actually in the statute. It came out in these interim final rules. It's this requirement that 75% of your loan proceeds have to be spent on payroll costs. Payroll costs are not just wages or things like health insurance premiums, employer contributions to retirement plans, those types of things. So it's a pretty big bucket. So reaching 75% shouldn't be too much of an issue, but the idea is you've got to hit 75% to achieve full forgiveness. The good news there is that the application clarified that this isn't a cliff. It's not an all or nothing test, which is previously how it was written. It was, if you spent 74% on payroll costs, sorry, you're just completely ineligible for forgiveness. And I think the outcry there was that that's too harsh of a rule. So when they came out with the application, they softened the requirements a bit and essentially came up with a sliding scale where if you don't hit 75%, that's fine, but it's going to reduce the amount that you can get forgiven on those non-payroll costs, things like utilities, your electric bill, and that type of thing. So that was good news out of this application. But that's the 10,000 foot view of this. It's important to keep in mind that those tests do operate independently. So just because you do really well bringing people back to work, if I bring everybody back and I'm at 100% of what I was before, but I've really throttled back their wages, it doesn't matter that I did great on the employee headcount test. I'm still going to get dinged on the wage test, and they operate independently. So if I don't do a good job of bringing people back off the layoff and I throttle back their wages of people I do bring back, I'm going to get double dinged. So it's important to keep those in mind. Just because you did really well on one doesn't mean that you can just stop paying attention to the rest of these.
Okay, so obviously, Mike, those three factors are key to figuring this out. What resources are available to help business owners as they sort through this and see where they are?
Yeah, so this is really going to be a team effort of all of your business advisors. I realize it's self-serving of a lawyer to say don't DIY this, but this is the difference between having free money and having a loan. And it's not just you're not just going to be paying the interest if you get this wrong. This is a loan. So if you got $100,000 and you really screw this up, instead of having $100,000 of free money, you've got to pay back that $100,000 plus interest. So you want to get this right if your goal is full forgiveness. And the people you turn to are, I can think of three at least. You're going to be working closely with your banker, because the bank is actually the person that forgives the loan, right? They're going to process your forgiveness application. They're going to be the ones telling you what documentation you need to produce. And it's just the SBA comes in and pays off your bank. That's really their only role for most of these small loans. So work closely with your banker, because they're going to be the one actually forgiving your loan. The second is going to be your CPA. This requires a lot of documentation to prove to your banker that you've satisfied these forgiveness tests. So you're talking about bank statements, pay registers, payroll tax filings, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into proving, we've paid these payroll costs, we've paid enough payroll costs. And it's typically going to be your CPA that's got access to that information, or at least can help you compile it in an organized fashion. And then the third, of course, is your attorney, because you want to make sure you're applying these tests correctly. We've covered just the very basics of it here, but if you go to the SBA's website, pull up the application, you can see that the tests are tricky. They're not very well worded. They give you a formula, but you want to make sure you're applying those formulas correctly. There's carve-outs for the headcount test. There's carve-outs for the wage reduction test. So if you find yourself in any of those situations that are unique to your business, that's really where you want to be working with your attorney to make sure that you understand the rule correctly and that you are applying it correctly. Another thing that attorneys can help you with is that actual application process to get your loan forgiven. So the application does a nice job of telling you the information you've got to fill out, what goes on what line, what supporting information you need to provide. But where an attorney can provide value to you is making sure that talks to the statute that your banker is going to be looking at, and essentially organizing that in a manner that's really easy for your banker to read. So you essentially want to hold your banker's hand, walk them through it and say, look, here's where I satisfied the first test, here's where I satisfied the second test, here's where I satisfied the third test, here's why I'm entitled to full forgiveness of my loan. And you want to make it easy for them, right? Because if you remember when you applied for this PPP loan, it was kind of a feeding frenzy. Everybody wanted to get in before the money ran out. And most people are going to be within the same week or two window when it comes time to forgiveness. So just like your banker was, really treading water on the front end, he's going to be in the exact same situation on this back end. So make it easy on them, and it's going to be easy for you to qualify for that full loan forgiveness too. And I guess with all that in mind, I want to take a moment to shamelessly plug our webinar that's coming up Thursday at 10 a.m. We are hosting yes, there it is, our webinar. You can see the link to our website there. On that landing page, you'll see a link to register. Registration is free. You can ask questions in advance. So if you have specific questions on the application process for forgiveness, make sure that you're submitting those. We did a good job of trying to work those into the presentation last time. We plan to do that again this time. If you attended our last one, it was a bit more high-level information on just what are the rules, how do we think they're going to resolve some of these ambiguities. Now with this new forgiveness application, we have some resolution to those ambiguities. So I think the way we're going to do this one is more of a case study, kind of give a sample company and walk you through what their forgiveness application is going to look like, and then use those to kind of highlight the changes in what the statute says the rule is versus what the application's kind of changed the rule to be, because they don't perfectly match up. So I think that's a webinar that would be worthwhile for a lot of people that are trying to do that forecasting, making sure they achieve full forgiveness.
This will be so helpful, Mike. So again, free webinar Thursday at 10 a.m. And if you have questions, in fact, if you have questions, feel free to ask them now. Mike, we do have a question from Vicki Hamilton-Allen. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you this now, because I think this is a great question. Mm-hmm. She's asking, are these assessments and forgiveness terms finalized now, or are they still fluid and forming?
Great question. They're very much still fluid. We do not have any new interim final rules that talk about how these rules should be applied. So the way we're looking at these new requirements in the application and the new formulas for how to apply these forgiveness reduction rules, we are essentially treating them with the force of law, even though they're not. It's just an SBA form. What we think it is foreshadowing for rules that should be hopefully forthcoming soon. But the way this process has worked, it's information has kind of trickled out. There hasn't been just kind of every so often a big new rule that makes a lot of clarifications. They might issue one or two FAQs one day and a small interim final rule the next day, and the information sort of trickles out. So it's very much not finalized yet. I mean, the application is, so I think that you're safe to rely on that when you're making your forecasts, but the application does not resolve all the ambiguities. So if your business finds itself in a situation where the application is still unclear on an issue, you want to be making sure that you're tracking it and checking in with your lawyer every so often to see if there's been any update on those items.
Such a great time to emphasize, Mike. You talked about it earlier, but kind of having that full business care team. I know businesses really right now are looking to the guidance from their attorneys, the CPA, from their banker. Of course, this is a time when we really need that care team to help us through this. So, Mike, what happens if a business doesn't get full forgiveness?
Yeah, it's not the end of the world. I mean, you obviously want to make sure that you're doing your absolute best, and some of that is just making sure you understand the terms. So we've had people that have thought that payroll cost is just wages, and they're really worried that they won't achieve full forgiveness. And just the realization that it's more than wages, it's health insurance premiums and all this other stuff. That alone is kind of a relief. So just making sure you understand the rules goes a long way. But even if you do that, you apply all the rules and you've just got money left over, that's fine. Not achieving full forgiveness is not the end of the world. I think having a good attorney and other business advisors in your corner might be able to do some creative planning. You might be able to, pay some costs you might not have thought of to achieve full forgiveness. But let's say you don't. I mean, you have two options, really. I mean, one is you keep the money and it's a cheap line of credit, right? And for some businesses, that's great. It's 1% interest payable over 2 years. There's a 6-month deferment before payments begin. So you're not going to find financing options through a bank that cheap. So if you have to keep it and use it as a loan, that's, it's not the end of the world. The other option is that there is a 6-month deferral period, and you can prepay the loan without penalty. So if you get to the end of your forgiveness period and you didn't use it all, just pay the rest back. It's not going to penalize you to say, I got a $100,000 loan, I spent $85,000 of it, and I just didn't have the expenses for the rest of the 15. Pay it back early. They're not going to ding you extra for giving the money back. So don't think that you need to lose sleep at night trying to come up with additional expenses, or if you've already got the rules satisfied, don't hire staff you don't need, or incur expenses that are going to go out past this 8-week covered period just for the sake of using up your loan proceeds. You got to think big picture here, and it's not going to kill you if you don't get the whole thing forgiven.
Gosh, this is so helpful, Mike. And I imagine that more case studies like these are exactly what you're going to be talking about on Thursday. I'm going to go ahead and put this graphic up one more time, and we've got the details for you, for those of you who are watching, in the post. Webinar on Thursday. So today, Mike has really given us this big picture overview, answering some of these key questions about how to ensure forgiveness of your PPP loan. On Thursday, Mike Zahrt and Taylor Gast will be together for this webinar, really diving into some more of these details to help you have a better understanding. If you have specific questions, you can email Mike. Mike, what's a great way to get a hold of you if people have questions that they'd like to have you include for the webinar?
Yeah, email or phone call is fine. If you go to our firm webpage, it's very easy to search for professionals. It's got all of my contact information on there. So phone call or email works great.
Great. Mike, thanks so much for taking the time this morning to talk through this.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And we will see you back here on Thursday at 10 a.m. for the webinar. All right. Thanks, Mike. Take care.